Welcome back to Nonfiction for Life, the podcast with authors who write compelling true stories and books with great ideas for living well. Today we are really excited to talk to Steve Young. Many of you know him as one of the greatest football players of all time. You may even remember some of his most memorable moments in NFL history. For example, there were his record-setting 6 touchdown passes in Super Bowl 19. We could talk a lot about Steve's professional life. The accolades just go on and on and on. But today we're going to be talking about his book, QB, The Man Behind the Spiral, which he wrote as a memoir. We're going to understand a little bit more about the personal side of Steve Young. But before we talk about Steve, let me just tell you, our listeners, a couple things. We're happy to let you know that you can listen into the podcast using your Amazon Echo through the TuneIn app. So there's lots of ways for you to get the podcast. You can subscribe in iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and you can always go to our website, Nonfiction for Life, and listen in there too. If you're enjoying the podcast, the best thing you can do for us is to write a review on any of our podcast platforms. We would really appreciate it. We'd also appreciate it if you share it with your friends so they can also listen to these podcasts. And now let me introduce our author today, Steve Young. He's a 2-time NFL MVP and a Super Bowl MVP, as well as a first ballot Hall of Famer. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2005 as the first left-handed quarterback to be honored that way. He's also the highest rated quarterback in NFL history. He has the distinction of being the only signal caller in the league annals to win 4 consecutive NFL passing titles. As I said, the honors go on and on. But I want to tell you a little bit of what he was like as a young boy. He was a gifted Mormon boy with a 4.0 GPA, a photographic memory, as well as a severe case of childhood separation anxiety. His memoir today will help us unpack who he was and what made him the man he is today. Welcome, Steve. Thank you for joining us on the program today.
You bet, Janet. How are you?
Great.
Great.
We appreciate you taking time today, and we're anxious to hear a little bit more about the man behind the spiral. Many books have been written about you, but you wrote this book, and it's quite personal. What motivated you to write it, and who's your audience, your main audience?
My audience were my 4 kids. What happened was, I finished playing in 2000. Braden was born, and so in 2000, and then Jackson in 2003. And so by about 2008 or 9 or 10, I had kids that were, deep into elementary school, 4th, 5th grade boys that were coming home and would say, "Boy, Dad, I heard some story that, I heard Joe Montana and you fought and you punched him." And no, that didn't happen. And it just happened more and more. And I realized I better put a narrative together for them, my story, so that they, as they grow older, they have what happened. And so I got thinking about Bob Gay was my friend who had just finished a book for himself about his own family history. And I said, who did that? It was Jeff Benedict. Well, I'm going to call him as well. So I called Jeff. Do you mind putting together a narrative for my kids? And so let's just start that. So we started a 3-year process where he would interview me, and then that would lead him to other people to talk to, and teammates and friends and family and different things. And he just started to gather all this information. Then he'd come back and we'd talk some more, and then he would gather, it kind of kept gathering. And then finally he said, "Look, I think we're in pretty good shape." And I said, "Great." I thought he'd hand me a box of, just papers that I would have my kids go through someday in the future. But he handed me chapters of a book. And I thought, all right, that's great. That's fine. But I could tell that he had suddenly a hope of having it published. And I said, "Jeff, I'll never publish it. There's just no way that can happen." Because I honestly, sincerely had done it for my kids because of the experience I had. I had never thought that, and I'd read other athlete biographies or narrative. I was like, no, no, I'm not going to do that. There might be some particular thing that I want to write about, and we would maybe tackle a certain thing, but I didn't want to have a narrative about my history, and it just never really resonated with me. So he said, "Well, do you mind if I gave a couple of chapters to some friends we had, some common friends. I said, that's fine. That's great. And then my friends would call me and say, hey, you need to publish this. And I'm like, oh, I see how this is going. Uh, I see with it. And so so that just happened. And, I don't know, Janet, I think my life, I kind of, uh, there's a voice inside of me, an inspirational voice, a sense of spirit that I know. It's like something that, speaks to me. It's like, it happened. I said, you're gonna publish it. And I know when I felt that, heard that voice inside of me, I had, my other part of me goes, oh, really? Are you sure? I don't want to, but I knew I knew at that moment it was going to happen. So then we went through that process, found a publisher in Houghton Mifflin, and went ahead and did it. But I'm glad we did, because then my wife Barb got involved, and then we went through the whole thing and really poured myself into it. She said, this has not your voice. You need to fix this. You need to make this better. This is not right. And so she just really dragged me forward in trying to get it so that the whole thing really was my story. And I'm really grateful to her. The editors called her at one point and said, do you want a job? Such a job of editing to a point where every little detail, everything was perfect. And that's just the nature of who she is. And so I really owe her that debt of gratitude, because when people read it, that's the one thing they say is it feels very honest. And I want it. That's what I didn't want to change anything from what I wanted to tell the kids. That's the story, and that's how I felt about it. And that's a great compliment. And the criticism is there's too much football, but I didn't really want to say, oh, we played in Detroit and I was 27 of 42 for 340 yards. I actually got pretty tired of that. But part of the narrative is that there's games going on and results. And so I don't know, if I did it again, I probably would reduce some of that. But for a guy that didn't intend to write a book, what are you going to do? It's never perfect. But I owe so many people, but I owe my wife Barb really to finalize it and make sure that it got all put in the right spot.
Well, I love that she really cared about the genuine voice, that your voice was there and it wasn't a ghostwriter, because that's often what happens with people like you. So let's talk about this book. It is quite personal, and obviously it is because you wrote it for your children. It becomes really clear as you read the book, as anyone reads the book, that you've been surrounded all your life by many, many fine people, and a number of them have been your mentors, including your own father, whose nickname is Grit. I guess everyone calls him Grit. His name alone may be a fair description of who he is, but let's give you a minute to paint a picture of Grit and tell us how his mentoring you in sports really influenced you from those early years.
Yeah, he was a no-nonsense guy. I always joke that his nickname was Grit, and he means it. He was a guy that he was not a tiger. I didn't have a tiger mom or a tiger dad. I had parents that encouraged me. And then my dad's big thing is you cannot quit. Once you commit, you can't quit. And he was very much about, when I was a young kid, I would always tell him I want to be Roger Staubach, Dallas Cowboy quarterback. And I had his posters up, and he always would tell me, well, that's a great dream, super dream, but what's the plan? I go, well, that's the plan. What do you mean dream plan? What are you talking about? That's the plan. He goes, no, a dream is very unlikely. A plan is very likely. And you being Roger Staubach is very unlikely. What's the plan? What are you going to do? And so that's what was ingrained in me at a very young age. And even to this day, a lot of the reasons why I am even anything I have accomplished really was because I was focused on two things. I was focused on a dream. And he never discouraged that. He's like, dreams are great, but there's got to be a plan. So there's always parallel paths that you're on that included the plan, the thing that was going to happen, and the dream that probably was not going to happen. And I'm grateful for that. There were many crossroads I came in my life where I wanted to quit and rationally should have, or maybe could at least make a good case for it. And he says, no, there's no way. In fact, one time in college, it's in the book, he was on the phone and I wanted to leave BYU, mostly because I wanted to go home because I was dealing with all the anxiety. He said, well, you can quit, but you can't come home. I don't live with quitters, he said. And I think that, you know, that ended my quitting idea. I didn't know where else to go. But
That's,
I think that captures him. And I really should take him on my mother too, because she was the most competitive, to be honest with you. She was the one that charged the field when I was a little kid, going after the kid who tackled me. She was the one that was the most nervous for games. She couldn't watch. She'd run around the net. She'd like, the game's on, I can't stand it. She'd go walk the neighborhood and kind of poke her head in. What's the score? And you know, when you play 17 seasons in the NFL and professional football, that's a lot of walking. That's a lot of years of anxiety that she went through. And so, you know, together they form a good yin and yang. And you know, there's not one that was tough and one that was loving. It was both. A lot of times it was they had different ways of, and it's really been an example to me in my own marriage that it's not. You have to be athletic. No one gets to just run one thing, and you know, you jump in where it fits, and you come together in a really kind of holistic way. And I think my parents did a good job of that.
I'm glad you brought up your mother too, because she played a really big part in your life. And you had, well, the two of you together had kind of a singular experience really early on that helps explain the anxiety, which to me was the big reveal in the book, is that you did deal with anxiety, because we see you as a man who's accomplished in his career, and yet there was a lot of stuff going on before you ever got to the NFL. So can you tell our listeners about that moment early on in your life that affected both of you?
Well, which are you? I don't know. Which one are you?
When you were 6 months old and you were in the walker.
Oh, right. So, okay, got it. So my dad was going to University of Utah Law School when I was born. I was born at LES Hospital, and then we were living on campus at the U in student housing. And there was a kind of a high flight of stairs, 13 stairs, wooden, pretty steep. And I had my little walker. When you're a little kid, you used to sit in that thing, and then you walk around with four little wheels. And I was at the top of the stairs and went down the stairs, head over heels. And my mother, who had seen it start to happen, was chasing me down. And she tells the story that she was just racing down the stairs. Oh, my baby, oh, my baby, oh, my baby. And I got to the bottom, and she thought for sure that I was dead. And I kind of popped up and, you know, was ready for more. And I think at that point she sensed that maybe I was, you know, I was going to be okay, you know, kind of pretty good athlete maybe. But for her, it was that sense of responsibility, and that she'd shirked her responsibility, and it really wrung a place in her that made her super protective. And I think that changed her a lot, because when parents, and I've experienced that, where I've lost somebody in the grocery store, and you have that moment like, oh my gosh, I have blown it. And then as a parent, you go through those moments where you think that you've really blown it. And I think it really cemented our relationship. You know, as I got older, she'd tell me, I wasn't there. I tried to catch you, and I go, Mom, it's okay, you know? And I think that, you know, those kinds of things bond you. And, I look back, you know, my mother is a peacemaker. She wants peace. And I've talked to her about that, because she wants peace at any cost. And I tried to show her, Mom, sometimes peace has to be, you know, you can't just make peace. Like, there has to be some rigor. And it just makes her crazy, because she's so much like, her North Star is peace, and she'll do anything. She'll sacrifice anything in herself, in what she feels, for peace for people near her or in the world. And I think, you know, when they think peacemaker, when Christ talks about peacemakers, my mother is genetically inside of herself, like, came out of the womb as a peacemaker. And it's really, I look back on my life with her, really, as I get older, you know how it gets, you just more and more appreciate her sacrifice to make sure that our lives were full of peace, and at her sacrifice in many ways. So That's what fun is writing. I got to say, writing the book brought out all of these things that I'd known and latently known, but they hadn't come out, and relationships and experiences, things I'd forgotten. Jeff chased down some things. I'm like, oh my gosh, I forgot that happened, and relationships that were deepened. And so I know that's probably why people why are such great journal writers, because that's the richness in it. And I really do appreciate that. But in writing the book, what really helped, not that relationships needed to be healed, but relationships could be deepened, because you got more of it forced you out, forced you into a situation where you had to be more open, and stuff just poured in. That was one of the benefits that I did not see coming. My number one thing was for the kids, and just having a narrative for them as they get older, that they'll know what I believe was the truth. But out of it, I gained a lot out of it too. So I'm appreciative of that.
Well, I feel like you did a good job describing relationships throughout the whole book. And so let's move to where you had to leave home. That was hard for you. You had a lot of anxiety. You worried about, you'd never spent even one night at anyone else's house, and you're 18 years old and you're being recruited by all these colleges, and you ended up going to Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, which was a long way from Connecticut. But there was a woman who took you in and let you stay at her house, who became another mentor for you. Tell us about Carol Burr and how you got connected to her and what she did for you.
Jen, I don't know how we could spend 5 hours on anxiety. I was unafraid. I lived this out. Anyone who knew me well, I can't say that because that's not true, because a lot of people read the book and who are dear friends and said, I didn't know that. I'm like, how could you not? It's like funny that but I have no worries about telling that part of the story, because it's just, I never didn't tell anyone on purpose. It just was a part of my life. I think it's important to recognize that. I don't know whether to steal the end of this. Should I tell the end of the story first? But I grew up not being able to be away from my parents, and with pretty severe, undiagnosed. I had no idea until I was in my mid-30s that I had a severe case of separation anxiety, childhood separation anxiety. Who knew that it's genetic in my mom's family? And since my finding out 15, 20, 20 years ago, it's all over. My uncle, my cousins, cousins that tried to go on missions, and then in the MTC they just broke down and couldn't get in. They had to come home, and like it's a part of our steed genetics, and we lovingly refer to the anxiety as kind of one of the things that blesses our lives. And that's the weird thing, is that I'm on the other side of that in many ways, and feel like, well, I don't know that I would want that on anyone else, but I certainly see the benefits of going through the rigor. Carol Burr, you mentioned. I went to college, and I went to college because that's what you're supposed to do. And I played football in college because that's what I had a chance to do as a scholarship. So I was following all the things that I had worked at, that the anxiety hadn't shown itself. Because during the day in high school and at home, I didn't notice it. I noticed it when my parents tried to go away, or someone invited me to go to overnight, or someone else like, no, I'm okay. I make up some excuse, I got practice, but it never was a big part of my life until I went to college. And as I prepared to go, I could start to feel like that, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know this is going to work. I'm, just that cycle you get into. And so then my parents, sensing that and seeing me before react to big changes in my life when they left town or something else, they go, okay, we got to find a family where he can feel like some comfort, and that maybe we'll be able to help with the transition. And so Claire and Eugene Friedman were in my ward in New York, in Westchester, the Westchester ward in Scarsdale, New York. They had Claire's Friedman's cousin was Carol Burr, and they had 9 kids living in Provo, very active, a boy that was exactly my age, kids all over the place. And she says, that'll be perfect. Have Steve go see them, and that'll make him feel comfortable. And and that'll get him through it. And so I remember landing in Provo thinking I'll never make, minute to minute, I'm not going to make it. And I remember meeting Carol and feeling some relief to be in the family atmosphere and sitting in their living room and watching all the action. It made me feel good. Like I just sit there and just hear it. And it would help me feel a little bit better about my situation. But I remember being down at practice, maybe a week into my time in Provo in my freshman year at BYU, and the Burr kids all had a boat. They went down to Utah Lake and they're all going to go down boating. And I said, okay, that's great. And practice said, we'll pick you up at the Smith Fieldhouse after practice. Okay, great. So practice ended, and whatever reason, the anxiety never goes away. Like it ebbs and flows, but when you're in the middle of it, it's like, and I remember feeling like I don't want to go with people to Utah Lake, and I don't want to. And I remember them turning the corner, pulling the boat, and me jumping behind the bushes, like to hide.
Wow.
And then they pull up, and they're all like, "Hey, Steve, hello, where are you?" They're like, "I don't know where he is. What's going on?" I'm in the bushes, hiding. Then they finally go, "I don't know, maybe you went home." Well, okay, and they pull away and go. And I felt the strange relief that they had left, but this strange feeling like, what am I? And I think back, that's kind of the one end. And then I think of, Super Bowl MVPs, and I think of like these guardrails of experience. And that's if you think about anxiety, that's one of my memories of the guardrail of like a low point of what that makes you like. Why wouldn't you get in with your friends that you just had, all these kids, and go down like boating, have some fun? Why would you hide in the bushes? And it's hard to describe. And at the point, think about it. I'm living this out and not knowing why. Like, I never asked the question, why did you jump in the bushes? I just went on with my life. And so the book kind of tracks that. And I honestly didn't mean for that to be the theme, but more than anything, since the book came out, that's what I hear from people. Thank you so much. My son, my daughter, I have thought things I don't, and I'm like, great. I would have told you a long time ago. I just didn't have a way to tell you my story. So I'm glad that I did. And so Carol, for the rest of the next 15 years, was the one that would get on the phone and actually spend the time. Because, you talk to people who love you, anxiety doesn't make any sense. Like, it's not rational. Like, it's very frustrating for my dad. I've been playing professional football, being paid to play the game he loved. He was so passionate about football. And to have his son be paid to go play the love of his life, he's like, why are you having fun? Just go have fun. And that was so unhelpful. Because, I don't know how to explain to you. What I needed was someone to just talk. I remember hours we'd talk, Carol and I would just talk, and she just, okay, well, that's it, and just, that's how I got through it. And so I'm so grateful for this legion of angels in my life, physical beings that were angels in my life that just kind of showed up at a time where it got me through the next mountain that we needed to climb, another Sherpa, to go along. And it felt like, it's like, how many, another Everest? I mean, come on, can we just take a smaller hill? But there was another part of me, and this is another part of the story, that would love the challenge, wanted to climb the hill, wanted to take it on, raced to it. And so there was this yin and yang that was always happening. And I guess the story really is about the idea that the go always beat out the stop. But it was close a lot of times. And I always tell folks, well, what's the story? What's the moral of the story? And I tell them, well, I think the moral of the story is go through it, don't go around it. Because that was always how it felt. It felt like I wanted to go around it, but I had to go through it. And that's how I describe living in this undiagnosed severe childhood separation anxiety into performing in front of 80,000 people and millions on TV. That's what it felt like. It was like I had to go through this, but man, do I want to go around it. Man, do I want to get out of it. Man, what am I doing? Get me somewhere far, far away. And truly to the last, I'm sorry, Janet, to run around here, but truly to the last game of 17 professional seasons was a Monday night game in Arizona. And I remember pregame, Barb and I were engaged at that point, and she lived in Phoenix, and so she was in her family. We were going to come to the game. It was the first game the family was going to see. And I remember wandering around the Cardinal Stadium 3 or 4 hours before the game on the phone with Barb, kind of like doing what I always did. Hey, so what's going on? Feeling, now this is 17, I mean, you'd think that, it did get better. Got significantly better when I finally got it diagnosed and I could understand what it was, but it never went away, even to the last game that I ever played. And so, the good news is that you can battle it, and it does recede. Like, it's hard for me today to get into a situation that feels anxious. It's just really super hard. I'm sure it could happen. If you drag me back to the NFL and put me in pads and let me go play, I'm sure it would come back. But in day-to-day life today, I really do feel like I'm free of that mantle, that cloak of anxiety. So that's Carol. That's the Carol Bohr story in a half an hour. Sorry about that.
No, it's very interesting. You really did feel, I feel like you really were fortunate that you had this ultra competitive spirit combined with the anxiety, because that compelled you to do so many great things. And some of the people recognized that in you, and your first coach, Lavelle Edwards, tapped into that. He was able to ignite that even more in you. And Jim McMahon, who was the quarterback you were following. So maybe you could tell us some of the things that they did that helped shape you as a football player.
Sure. So I was, again, it seems strange, but I ended up at BYU, which was one of 2 or 3 schools in the country at that time in 1980 that was throwing the football, passing the football. Everyone ran, wishbone, option, spread up, and no one, it was just unheard of. And so Miami, Stanford, and BYU were the 3 schools that were throwing the football. It was kind of this new thing. And I love the idea of that. And I show up at BYU, and it's this long story about how I got to BYU, kind of a miraculous story. But I show up on campus, and I'm 8th string. I remember the paper in the Smith Fieldhouse. I walked in, and they had everyone listed, and it was Jim McMahon and Royce Bybee and Jim McKimble and Mark Haugo and Jared Krasmarzik, and on it went down. And the 8th name was mine. And I don't know what made me think that I could play quarterback at BYU, because I hadn't even learned how to throw. I was still spinning the ball out of my hand like, I don't even know how to describe it. It's just not even close to how you truly throw a football. But in my freshman year, because I was so competitive, because I was so desirous to make a place for myself, and I was on the JV team, and I performed well enough because I ran around so much and created so much, action and drama, that I got noticed. But what I got noticed was that I was left-handed, and the offensive coordinator for BYU, Doug Scoble, walked up to me one day and said, "Hey, kid, I know you think you're going to play quarterback, but I don't coach lefties." And I was like, "Oh, this is the varsity coach," and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, what am I going to do?" But I kind of ignored it because I was in my freshman year, knowing we weren't going to see each other. And so Lavelle, at the end of the year, said, "Steve, you're super fast. You're super athletic. We have so many quarterbacks. Doug doesn't want to coach a lefty. Maybe you should play defense." And so I moved over. But then Doug Scoble left. Ted Tollner came in, and I'd learned to throw. Jim McMahon was right-handed, and I was left-handed, and I would copy him. And I know people that know Jim know him as a crazy guy, super unorthodox. But his game, his football game, the details to the principles and the basics of playing quarterback, he was as fundamental as anyone. He rivaled Joe Montana on fundamentals. I mean, the way he dropped back, the way he threw, how he threw the football, how he played the position was so fundamentally sound. And so I, as this young freshman, would kind of copy him because it was a mirror image. And how he did it, I would do it. And then I thought, oh my gosh, you throw it like that, and your finger comes from this way rather than like that. Oh, and then once I realized that, all of a sudden I could put power on the ball. I could actually throw it like a baseball. You could get behind it and just use every bit of your strength to throw it, and it just came out, and I could put it right where I wanted to, like right there. And I'm like, holy cow, I can't believe it. But now I'm playing defense, and I'm lefty, and I don't know how to make this all work. I finally figured out how to play quarterback. And that's when Ted Toner came in and begged Lavelle Evers for 2 weeks of spring ball. And the thing about Lavelle, he was somebody that truly understood. He had a gift from God that it was an ability to see others, to see who they were and who they could be, and he had discernment about the potential, and it was something that it was just the gift. And so when he put that to me, at first it was the potential to be a leader, and he talked about what I could accomplish in life. But when he put it to my football, when I finally figured out how to throw, in his mind, he could see you could be great. And I was like, I'm just learning how to throw. I don't know what you're talking about. He goes, no, I'm going to give you that chance. And he gave me that chance and stood with me the rest of the time. It didn't go always smooth, but he had that sense that it's going to work out. And so I've had a number of people in my life, for football, Janet, and also in life, that have seen the future and said, you can do great things. And I'd be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But someone who I respected saying something like that made me sense, and it gave me a sense of purpose. Like, well, okay, that means I got work to do. And it gave me inspiration and hope. And so it started early in my life and kept going. And it seemed like every time any new challenge, any new moment, any change, because that was the thing about anxiety. Anxiety did not like change. I didn't like to, go from place to place or have change. It was like once I got settled, and I settled in Provo. Provo became home, and I didn't want to go back to Connecticut anymore. Home, I now had two homes. One place I was comfortable in Connecticut, and now I had two homes. I was very comfortable in Provo. And then, I made this crazy decision to go play professional football, which my anxiety side of myself said, do not do that. Forget that. Don't ever do that. Even think about that. But that other part of me said, oh, I'm going to do it. And so I signed this contract in the USFL at the time in 1983, beginning of 1984, and for all this money, crazy amounts of money that was famous. It made me world famous for money, which I hated. And I remember thinking I had this moment when I froze, when I was supposed to go down and play for this team. I'd signed the contract. I'd gone back to Provo to pack up my stuff, and I froze because the anxiety just overwhelmed me. Like, I cannot do this. What have I done? And I can't even move. And my teammates, my old buddies, Lee Johnson and Jim Herman, who are my dear friends, they had one more year, so they were still at BYU, but we were living together. And they saw it, and they'd seen this pieces of it before. And they called my dad and said, hey, Mr. Young, Steve is he's stuck. He's not moving. And my dad's like, let me talk to him. And he talked to me. He goes, ooh, this is bad. So he flew out. And my dad did not like to waste money. And so he flew out, bought a ticket to come out to Salt Lake, and drove down to Provo and went in to see me. He goes, Steve, we got to go do this. I go, Dad, I can't do it. There's no way. I can't even think about it. He goes, I'm sorry, son. You don't have a choice. We got to just pack up and start putting one foot in front of the other. And it kind of brings a tear to the eye. So we packed up, and because I was with him, I knew that I couldn't say no. My body wanted to say no, but I knew I couldn't. So I started down the path. And so then you make your way to the car, to the airport, and then we landed in Los Angeles. And we're going through my mind all the things that I was going to tell the person from my team that was going to meet me. They told me that the trainer for the team was going to come out. The guy that takes care of your body, your bruises and tapes your ankles and that kind of a guy. He was going to meet us, and I said, well, I was coming through all these scenarios that I was going to tell him, look, this isn't going to work out, and I know it sounds crazy, but your mind just is trying to protect itself. It's like you're drowning and you just want some air. And I remember landing, and out came this guy, and he said, "Hello, my name is George Curtis." And I said, "Well, nice to meet you." And I started to go into my dad's like, "No, don't say this." I was like, "Oh, I can't." And I started to tell him how I'm not going to be able to do this. I can't. It's too much. And trying to, I remember George stopped me and kind of held me by the shoulders, like, "Hey, I know we just met. I want you to know, like you, I am LDS, and we're going to do this a step at a time." And I remember just weeping, and he cried. And my dad, who never cries, was crying like, who is this angel that just showed up to tell me that we're going to do it? And that's exactly what happened. We did it every day. We just walked through it together and started to make a career that, that if George or my dad would have said, "Hell yeah," it would have been a big scene, signing for a worldwide news and then not playing. But that just goes to show you that there's little places in my life that were pretty pivotal, and people that I just dearly love for who they were at the time. And I'm sure everybody has things like this, but writing the book kind of, sorry to go on and on, but it really leads you to the sense of how you were. It's almost like if they planned it, like they handed me off from okay, I've done my George, you did your part, I'm handing it off. Carol's going to hand it off to George. George is going to hand it off to the Merrills, and Merrill's going to hand it off to the Pearys, and the Pearys are going to, it's like this, if they would have planned it, you would have wondered if they hadn't just planned it. But I think God probably planned it out a little bit. So I'm grateful for that.
It does seem like there was someone there for you at every turn. And yet, and you were just this fantastic athlete, but you always seemed to have some sort of challenge in front of you with that as well. It wasn't just easy. I mean, playing for the 49ers and being in the shadow of Joe Montana was not easy. That was a hard thing with the media and on a personal level. Maybe you can talk about that and how that affected your career.
So and I think it leads to the kind of the crescendo of the anxiety story. I was in Tampa Bay playing for the Buccaneers, and we were struggling. I was playing as hard as I could. It was rough. And Joe Montana had his second back surgery, and Bill Walsh had convinced himself that I was going to be the next guy. I don't know what inspired him to believe that, but he believed that. And so he worked out a trade to get me to San Francisco, and he told me, "Steve, Joe's not going to play much more because he's got these back surgeries." So I thought, oh my gosh, I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm really a great opportunity for me. And I remember the first time Joe running out on the field as a 49, my first practice with the 49ers, and the first thing I said to myself is, he does not look very hurt. And I remember telling Bill, Coach Walsh, "Coach, you told me he was hurt, and he doesn't look hurt." And Bill's like, well, I don't know what to tell you. So that started the odyssey of me and Joe, and Bill's interest in seeing me compete with Joe. And that created all kinds of drama around like you think about the 49ers from 1980 to 2000, those 20 years, we were in the playoffs 19 years in a row. We were in the Super Bowl 5 times. We were in the championship game 13 times. I mean, it was an incredible success. And I joined that team while they'd already won 2 Super Bowls, and Joe Montana was already super famous. When you think about Tom Brady today, or Aaron Rodgers, any of the famous guys, he was as famous as Tom Brady is today. And so all of a sudden I show up, and I have this part of me that says, "What are you doing here? You can't take this on." And now I'm like, well, I'm taking Joe Montana on. And I'd already replaced Jim McMahon, who had 73 NCAA records. So maybe that's just, it's like, how hard can we make it? And that was the spirit of it. And so in trying to compete with Joe and then eventually replacing Joe, brought a rigor that I thought I would collapse from. The comparison, the sense that I could never live up to it, who do I think I was to try to actually accomplish this? And I got to a point where the anxiety and the performance, I think at this point it's probably performance anxiety, got to a crescendo of disappointment in my own performance, and I felt like I couldn't do anything right, and how can I possibly accomplish this goal? And I started to play. It was my job now. Joe was hurt, and now it was my team, and I felt this weight that I didn't think I could carry. And so it got to a point in the middle of the one season in 1991 where I said, usually if I didn't play well, I'd make it through Monday and Tuesday, Wednesday be fine. Then Thursday I start to feel funny, and Friday and Saturday and it'd be rougher. But the good news is I always slept. I always was rested. I don't know why. That was always a good thing. But this week I didn't sleep. Thursday night I got very little sleep. Friday night I didn't go to bed. So then I called in sick on Saturday, and Saturday night was in such a state that I was like, I don't know. I didn't sleep Saturday night. So now I've been up 2 nights in a row. I'm just overwhelmed in so many ways. And I say to myself, something's like, this is sad that it takes this much to feel like something's wrong, like something is not right. And I remember saying to myself, and sweet Carol Burr, who I'd been on the phone with the whole time, she goes, look, someone's coming out. And she sent Rex Cokerhands, who is a therapist in Provo, and a good friend of hers. And he said, look, you're getting on a plane. I'm buying you a ticket. Just don't ask any questions. Go to this address and go knock on the door and talk to this guy. So she sent Rex out Saturday because she sensed Steve's in trouble. And Rex shows up and he's like, hey, I'm here. Carol sent me. And so immediately, obviously, I'm loving the idea of talking, but it really didn't make much of a difference right away, but a sense of someone caring enough and someone to bounce some things off. But clearly his position was, hey, you're in a bad spot. Are you really going to go try to play? And I said, well, I don't have a choice. I got to go play. And he goes, no, you don't have to play. There's bad results of you not playing, but you don't have to play. And started a process of thinking about, look, but you've got to start dealing with whatever's going on. And I said, okay, it's fair. If we win this game, if I play and we win, then I will go to the team doctor, who was a scary guy that had been around a long time, Jim Clint, one of the guys that had been around the team for a long time. I'll go tell him that something's not right. Because if we lose, you can't do that. You can't, in the NFL, there's no excuses. You can't lose and then go to the doctor and say, hey, something's wrong. As in my mind, that's just not possible. So I made that commitment to Rex overnight. I said, look, I promise you, I go play, and I actually play pretty well, and we win. And I remember seeing Rex Cokerhands, my friend that I'd met 24 hours earlier, and he looked at me like, who the heck are you? Who does this? Who goes and plays well? No one. And he goes, did you do what you promised to do, to go talk to the doctor? And I said, I did. And I recounted the story that I was in the 49er locker room, back in the training room, and I had a towel around me and getting my knee bruises and trying to get some ice on certain places and feeling that sense of dread that now I know I need to say something to the doctor, but I don't know what to say. What am I going to say? Oh, I can't. I didn't know. I was kind of lost in the moment, but I knew I had to do it. I promised myself and promised others. And so I said, as Jim Clint, his name was Reggie, and we called him Reggie. He was the team doctor. I said, Reggie, can I talk to you a minute? And you got to think of the bowels of Candlestick Park and this kind of drippy kind of place in the back corner. And I pulled him aside. I said, can I talk to you a minute? And he goes, yeah, no problem. He goes, what's up? And I started to recount the last, 3 days, and then kind of more of a history of I don't know. I don't know why, or this is just, it just eats me up, and I don't know, And as I started to recount, I'm looking at Reggie, and he's staring right at me. And as I'm recounting the story, suddenly I see out of his eye a big tear, like a big ball of tear, and it kind of rests there and just falls down his face. And then another, but his face doesn't change. And I go, Reggie, are you crying? And then he just breaks down, telling me that he has fought anxiety his whole life. He barely made it through medical school. And he goes, Steve, you have a genetic anxiety. And I go, I do? Well, what do you mean? And so the next day he sent me up to a child psychiatrist that he knew and asked me 10 questions. And he said, if you answer to 5 of them yes, then I'm going to diagnose you as adult undiagnosed separation anxiety. I answered yes to 10. And so he goes, whew, that is really something, Steve, because most people who I see that are undiagnosed throughout their lives that have this severe case of childhood separation anxiety, it's, they're hiding in their parents' basement. I mean, they are self-medicating. They're doing a lot of stuff that's very, dangerous. But I don't know what to say. And I said, you know what? Thank you. And I remember feeling this sense of relief that I now knew what the heck was going on. And for me, that was 90% of it, was just to be able to name it and understand and have others say, Steve, this is not like, it makes sense to me. And so because it made sense to them, who are really smart professional people, it made sense to me. And so it's like, oh my gosh. Now, it didn't make performing that much easier, but it made it easier. It made it, I could talk to it. And my son has a touch of this. And we talk all the time that, there's things that you can't do right now. And I get that. But there's things you can do that are uncomfortable that we need to do, that we need to lean into this because we can't let this run the show. And, anyway, you talk about Joe Montana and Bill Walsh and the 49ers. It led to this moment where it's really kind of a breakthrough moment for me.
Well, you really were such an anomaly to be performing at such a high level and then have this severe case of anxiety. You talked about them being surprised that you weren't self-medicating. I don't think our conversation would be complete if we didn't talk about your religion. You never tried to hide it, but in the book it becomes a little bit easier to understand what that religion entailed. As a Mormon, or you've mentioned LDS, you had very high standards. You didn't drink, you didn't smoke, you didn't believe in premarital sex, and these morals seem very incompatible with the lifestyle of a pro football player. So what kind of repercussions did you experience from trying to hold to those standards and stay true to your beliefs?
Because I was the only Mormon in high school, in Greenwich High School, growing up, I got used to being different. And I also got used to really understanding and respecting other people. Most of my friends in high school were Italian Roman Catholics. And so I got to really understand them. I remember going to midnight mass with them all the time. They came to church with me. And I began learning how to tell people who you were in a really inclusive, wholesome way that was not off-putting. That I wanted to be your friend. I wanted you to understand who I was, but I want to be your friend. And that had rigor to it. And I was willing to spend the time in the rigor. And a lot of it was self-deprecation. A lot of it's making fun of yourself, being willing to laugh, making sure that people knew what was important to you, but recognizing that it might seem a little crazy at times. But in time, just the respect that people had, and like mutual respect that we shared for each other, that we gained in relationships. I got tested a ton. But most of the time, I knew from my experience in high school that the tests come, but the respect is behind it. And that people will always sense that you mean it and that it's important to you. But yet you don't. But if I was going to judge others, if I'm going to poke them in the eye because of it, then that's not going to work. And you have to be fallible. You have to recognize that it's no judgment. And I mean it. I cannot do that. I need to really take you in as a friend and recognize that we're going to be friends no matter what. And it brought to a lot of great conversations. It taught me a lot about my own religion because of the questions. It really has brought me even to today, as I taught gospel doctrine in Sunday school for now a number of years, and reaching back to Carol Burr and Truman Madsen and my parents and other great theologians that have brought forward my own sense of understanding of this restored gospel that is so deep and broad and wonderful. that's allowed me to share it in really non-combative ways, in ways that I think even today, relationships that I've had my whole life with my Jewish friends or Roman Catholic friends or atheist friends or whatever friends, friends that, don't really think about religion at all. Um, and just finding that place. So I think if you look, the question really was about where did I understand how to do that. It was really growing up as the only Mormon in town. And, there's this famous play, Saturday's Warriors, that a lot of kids had back in the day. It was kind of a Mormon play around some of the theology and eternal, life before with God and life after, and how we would hear interim time to be tested. And it's kind of a fun play. And I remember listening to the music all the time. And that was my friend. That was my Mormon friend that I would do homework with. And I also remember a time when my teammates, because, every Wednesday was the night when all the linemen went down to the bar to have, beer and burgers, and, do you want to come? And I was like, yeah, I want to come. And they're like, the first couple of times it was awkward and weird, and then finally they embraced it. Like, oh, well, give them some milk, and so they brought out a picture of milk, that was so funny, and then I would chug the milk, and we just had fun. We would make it a part of, as best we could, a part of my life, their lives together, but I never wanted to not be a part of their lives. And so whatever extent that I could, and I leaned into that my whole life, opportunities that came up that maybe Mormons hadn't found themselves in, with opportunities to be on TV shows or be on Jay Leno or go to the White House or go visit, or be, I just never wanted to say no. I was like, look, yeah, let's go do all of those things and lean into all these experiences, because, no reason a Mormon can't be there, and it's been a good life that way, recognizing that you're a little different, and that's okay, and but there's a lot to learn from each other. And so I don't know what other experiences one other last experience I had, I'll share with you, in high school. I think it's in the book, where my teammates at my high school we rallied together each other, and we really kind of bonded. And we were at a big party, high school party with multiple high schools, a lot of beer, a lot of alcohol, a lot of stuff going on. And kids from the other school had heard about me, and they were gonna end my sobriety. They were gonna, like, we're gonna take them down, and we're gonna be force you to drink. And I just remembered my friends from my teammates coming over and pushing these guys away, and said, "You don't mess with him. He's Mormon. He doesn't drink." And it was like, oh my gosh, they just, it's like that sense that, that they respected me and defended, and they would come to my defense. And so, anyway, it's a big part of my life. There's no question. It's my North Star, my theology, a sense that our heavenly parents have put us at risk here, for a good reason, and they can alchemize any experience to our good, through covenant living, is kind of the way that's my basic theology, and it's something that has provided me a lot of solace. And there's been, just in the hour we've been together, you can see that a lot has happened, and having a North Star is super important, because if not, Jesus Christ in my life, a sense of his owning creative power, the creative, syntropic power away from death and destruction, and I always call it the second law of thermodynamics, to entropy, to chaos, to death, to corrosion, to everything else. There's this power that the Savior owns that I want to be around. I'd like to be associated with, and figure out how to include myself in that process has really been a engaging thing through my life. And so I got to tell you, through all of the ups and downs and rigors, having something, a light that is out there, is super important, because there were moments when, and I say this metaphorically, I really do, I don't mean it to be true, but there were times when I got on the 101 in Palo Alto, and the sign would say San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge, and the other one would say, San Jose, and San Jose was work, and the Golden Gate Bridge was left, and it's like, we're not going left, we're going to work, because there was those moments when you felt like, I don't know, I'm not sure I can go right. I don't know how I'm going to go down there and do that. But there was part of my competitiveness, part of my stick-to-itiveness, part of my that came from my parents and others and all the people around me, more than maybe anything, was a faithfulness that I'm doing something for me important. I'm getting to see how good I can get. It's part of my theology. So that was, when you have that, you don't go around it. You go through it, because that's the whole point. And I'm not perfect. Was never perfect at it. I'm sure I went around it a lot of times, but the sense is that you want to go through it.
We love hearing this from you, directly from you. You did have to go through most of this alone, and a subplot in the book is your never-ending search for a wife, and you finally found Barb well into your 30s. So I think it would just be fun for our listeners to hear a little bit about what attracted you to her, and how she's, since the time you met her and married her, how she's shaping your life.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Um, you know, for whatever reason, I didn't get married for quite a while, and not for lack of intent. But I remember meeting Barb. I tell her the story that when I first called to tell her that I was headed over to pick her up, she didn't pick up, and I got her voicemail. And her voice on her voicemail, I turned to my friend when I hung up, and I said, "That voice I know." And it was a sense of, like, I don't know. It was just one of those things where you heard a voice, and it's like, I don't know what to tell you about that, but I can't wait to go on this date. Then went on the date, and immediately our conversation was elevated. I was very much a spiritualist. I was very much around faith and what we just talked about. And she, growing up in Mesa as a non-Mormon, understood Mormons very well. Not necessarily, culturally all the good stuff. There was a lot of bad things that Mormons were doing in Mesa at the time for around how they treated her, but also all the good things. She could see all the good in it too. And so as we got talking, immediately our conversation was elevated. And I just remember that sense of elevation drew me in, and we dated, and I never went home. I went down to Phoenix my friend had put this together. My roommate at BYU had convinced for 10 years when he first met her, "This is your wife." And for 10 years, he couldn't get us together. Finally, he got us together, and we never really separated, even now 18, 19 years later. And his faith that this was meant to be. And now, through 18 years of marriage, and almost 18, and knowing each other almost 20, we have maintained an elevated conversation. She has, I tell her, my sense of spirituality, my sense of testimony, my sense of faith is like I'm on a rocket ship, because she's always has me in this elevated state of conversation around super important things. And so our story in the book, people have written me and said, "Oh, that's my favorite part." And I thought, oh my gosh, I didn't have that. That wasn't part of the narrative when we were going to give it to the kids, because we figured the kids would know that. But when we added that, it's really cool that's what took my kids in and my wife into doing the book, because then it connected us all to this story. And it's been fun for them to, the kids, none of them have read the book all cover to cover. They've toyed with it and messed with it and so forth, and that's fine. They read it at their own time. But one of the things that they enjoy thumbing through is the story about how Barb and I met, and the incredible story about what that took to get done, and then what we, it's just I don't know, destiny or whatever you say, but it's a love story, that's for sure. And,
well, that's the magic for them, right? You have this incredible football career, and then the magic in the book for them is you finding their mother And you say at the end of the book, I'm going to quote this, you say, playing in the NFL was a great life, but the life I have today is even better, much better. So before you go, just tell us what you love about this phase of your life. And I'm going to
I
tell the
don't know what
listeners just a tiny story. Yes, when we were planning this interview, you said, well, I have to take the kids to gymnastics at this time, and I know that's where you need to go right now. But that's what I think is so fun, is that your life is now so entrenched in being a
Yeah.
father and a husband.
Well, I'm 100% committed to it because, I really do believe that we're equal partners, and I really do believe that that it is the greatest challenge because I learned so much about myself through raising kids, and together trying to figure out how best to do that. And life, it'll never be 3rd and 10 and Lambeau Field down by 4 against the Packers, in the fourth quarter, with a minute and a half left. I mean, that's just, it's its own unique experience. It's its own, and I think a lot of athletes try to recreate that, and to their detriment. You need to leave that behind. And so as great as that challenge was, and as engrossing as that challenge was, this is much more sublime and rich. It's selfless, in so many ways. It's forced me to. There's 4 words that are in our scripture in the Book of Mormon that describe. Well, it's actually in Doctrine and Covenants, describe the elements, the qualities that a human should have if they're going to serve God. These qualities are love unfeigned, long-suffering, gentle persuasion, and meekness. Those are the qualities, the power qualities, the ones that empower people to actually do good work. And football didn't teach me those words. Football, I look back and it's like, yeah, maybe meekness, no, maybe some love, I don't know. But it was like, but since then, if that's my goal, if that's my North Star in the qualities I want to embrace, then certainly marriage and family and raising kids and having that rigor and long-suffering, gentle persuasion, love unfeigned, and meekness are things that I really do want to take in. They feel like a hairy suit sometimes, but in engaging in those qualities, I do see the value. I see the long value in how it holds people close, how it gives people space, how it does these ironical things in making things work for other human beings. So anyway, a little theology of my personal theology, and then also just how I do it. Barb, she was in bed for 5 months of every child in pregnancy and could hardly eat, barely made it through. And as I watched her suffer day in and day out for such a long time, and then willing to do it again, I thought to myself, she's giving up she's giving up part of herself, like physically. She's giving up a part of her, her body, and you could see how difficult it was on her. And so I just committed. I committed, Janet, 100%. Like in this covenant relationship, I am in 100% whatever. And so I changed almost every diaper. I did everything I possibly could to be helpful, and still do, and love it. If it's my turn for dinner, if it's my turn for bedtime, if it's my turn, they're not even turns. Doesn't matter. It's just you're in, and you just do stuff, and you do whatever it takes. And I love it. I love that part of my life today. And I don't know how else to describe it. Like right now, it's 2:17. I have to go have carpool. So
Yeah. Well, thank you
sorry.
so much, Steve. What a delight it has been talking to you. You really are so generous with helping us get to know the man behind the spiral, and without any pretenses. We are really happy to have talked to you today. Thank you for your time.
Oh, Janet, you bet. It's my pleasure, and I'm sorry you got all of me today. I started crying. I don't know what the heck's going on, but it Must be something going on in the back. But anyway, thank you so much. And I really do have to go to carpool, so see you
All
later.
right, we'll let you go. Bye-bye. You've been listening to Steve Young, author of QB, The Man Behind the Spiral. I promised you that we would get to know a more personal side of Steve, and he really pulled back the curtain for us today. We hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you want to get more podcasts and blog posts about books that are insightful, inspiring, and uplifting, then please go to our homepage, nonfictionforlife.com, and sign up to join our email list. You'll find the button right there on the homepage. We also are always interested in your ideas. If you have ideas of books and authors that you'd like us to highlight, please post something on any of our social media pages. We hope we're helping you save time as we curate these books. I'm your host, Janet Perry, and this is the Nonfiction for Life podcast. Remember, at Nonfiction for Life, we believe there's something for everyone. We'll talk to you next time.